Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Joanne Page, our president and CEO, David Rothenberg, our founder who is behind us, welcome to the Fortune Society, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
My name is Stanley Richards. I'm the executive vice president of Fortune. Every year, Fortune Society provides more than 6,500 formerly incarcerated men and women with the tools and services they need to rebuild their lives. The services we provide range from discharge planning and aftercare, substance abuse treatment, mental health, housing, access to benefits through our single-stop program, crisis intervention, family reunification. We are really a one-stop shop. This investment is important for two reasons. One is because this investment, plain and simple, saves lives. The other reason it's important is because it saves money and resources from investing in the criminal justice system, period. I can tell you last year, Fortune Society, through our ATI program, saved the city and state $8 million by providing alternatives to incarceration for men and women who would be facing the criminal justice system. Investments in reentry pays off. Over 50% of our staff were formerly incarcerated, many of whom are sitting behind me. Men and women who built their life after incarceration because of initiatives like you're going to hear today. Let me tell you a little bit about my story. I'm from the Bronx, Soundview, and all my life I thought that I would be cycling in and out of prison. And I learned how to live in that environment. On my last incarceration, I spent close to 2 years on Rikers Island before going upstate and serving state prison time. I dropped out of school. I got involved in selling drugs. I got involved in using drugs. I got involved in devastating my community. And for all my life, I thought that prison was going to be a way of life. It wasn't until my last incarceration when I went to school and I obtained my GED. And that GED told me that everything I heard about who I am and who I could be was wrong. Then I went to college, and I graduated from college. I graduated magna cum laude. And I went from this kid from Soundview who thought that my life would be always about incarceration to believing that my life could be different, that my life, in my hands, things could be different. All I needed was an opportunity. When I came home from prison, Fortune provided me with that opportunity, and I started here as a counselor. I tell you, every single day, we get to do a couple of things here that's pretty amazing. One, we get to create the world we wish we lived in, right in this space. Two, we get to see the beauty in people sometimes before they see it in themselves. I know there was a time in my life when I didn't see the beauty in me. And three, we get to treat people the way we want to be treated. And what you're going to hear today is an initiative that's going to allow people to have a second chance. It's going to be focused on building people, not building institutions, not building a pathway into jail, but building a pathway out of jail. It is my great honor to be here today. As I said, on behalf of Joanne Page, our president and CEO, I want to welcome everybody. And I want you to hear a little more about why this work matters and why this initiative matters. And I want to introduce Leviticus, someone who was one of our participants.
My name is Leviticus. I'm 22 years old. When I was 14 years old, I made some mistakes that landed me on Rikers Island. That was a devastating point in my life. It also taught me how to value freedom. I was fortunate enough to be given the opportunity by my lawyer to participate in an alternative to incarceration program provided by the Fortune Society. But upon my release, I knew where I wanted to go, but I just didn't have the resources to get there. Like, it was so hard for me. I didn't know where to go to get an identification card. I didn't know where I would be attending school upon my release. I didn't know what a bank account or how to go about a bank account or manage money or do any of those things. I didn't know. When I got to Fortune Society, I had a counselor that was on top of me about things, getting things done, pointing me in the right directions, basically steering me on the right track so I won't derail. and re-enter where I just left from, as far as Rikers Island. And doing those things, when I got to Fortune, I knew I wanted to go back to school. I knew I wanted to get job readiness program. I knew I wanted to do all these things, but I didn't know where to go or how to do it. And what a lot of formerly incarcerated people is that a lot what others don't understand is these people want to change. They want to do better, but how could they do better if they don't know how to do better? And I see this every day. I see different young adults coming to me saying, like, I want to do better. I want to move on with my life. I want to get better at being passionate about what I'm doing, things of that nature. But they don't know how to. With Fortune Society, it provided me with a job readiness program. I went through a 2-week training basically on how to go into an interview and dominate and execute and actually get a job. Like, I used these tactics on many different jobs, and it actually worked for me. I didn't let people define me as my mistake. I didn't let my mistakes define me.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
That's right.
I let those mistakes, I looked at them as obstacles that I can overcome. And me overcoming those obstacles made me stronger as a person. It made me able to contribute to society in a positive way. Being at the Fortune Society, I also got to meet the founder, David Rothenberg, and Joanne Page. We went on a trip to Bennington. It actually opened my mind because before then, being that I was incarcerated, I didn't know what college campuses look like. Because being that I was incarcerated at that young age, I didn't know what these things were. So when I got to Fortune, I took the road trip to Bennington. It gave me it gave me a sense of open-mindedness, like it was better out there. And I knew I wanted that betterness, but I just didn't know where to go to get it. And when I entered these doors of the Fortune Society, where I wanted to go it was basically handed to me. All I had to do was utilize all the resources that was around me, as far as educational services, job readiness program, and a bunch of internships that prepared me for my resume, basically to uplift my resume, things of that nature. I just want to thank you all for listening to my story. Now I would like to turn it over to Mayor Bill de Blasio. I'm grateful for his commitment to reform and honored to be with him today.
Yes, we are.
Thank you.
Yes, we are.
Well, Leviticus, I want to tell you, that was really a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And you have learned to dominate. I'm impressed. In a good way. And Leviticus says something very powerful, which I think every one of us as human beings can relate to. We should not be defined by our mistakes. Remember that famous saying, to err is human, to forgive divine. And Leviticus, you went through a lot, but you did not let it define you. I admire that. That takes strength, and that takes persistence. And obviously, I can hear your intelligence, your poise, you're in front of a bank of cameras and all, and you made it look easy. So I want to let you know how proud of you we are. Let's give him another round of applause. And this is what today is all about. Talking about how we help good people who made a mistake to not make a mistake again. That for those who've gone on the wrong path, we have a chance to catch them. We have a chance to rehabilitate them. That's why we call it the Department of Correction. It's all about getting people back on a positive track. We have a chance to do that if we learn the lessons that have been taught for a long time here at the Fortune Society. So I want to just take a moment to thank everyone at the Fortune Society. David, Thank you for what you put in motion years and years ago, and all the wonderful people sitting behind me. Stan, thank you for your leadership and your powerful story as well. And the fact that you not only turned your life around, but then became a leader in turning other people's lives around. This is a powerful and magical place, but it did not come easy, I know. And I know the Fortune Society has struggled against all of the stereotypes and misunderstanding in this world about folks who end up in jail. But we're talking about human beings. Leviticus' story makes it so clear. And I can hear in your story, Leviticus, you know, your goodness, your humor, your wit, your warmth. That mistake you made obviously didn't show the world all those other features. But now you got a chance through the Fortune Society to show your whole self.
Correct.
And that's what we want to do for other people. So we want to talk today about some new things we're going to be doing to afford these kind of opportunities to many, many more folks. And we think it's going to have a huge impact, not only on their lives and our communities, but on continuing our efforts to reduce the number of people in our jail system. I want to thank at the outset our Commissioner for Correction, Joe Pont, who has done an outstanding job reforming our correction system and setting the stage for even bigger reductions in the number of folks in jail and a more humane and better approach to rehabilitating people. Joe, I just want to thank you for all you have achieved. Liz Glazer, Director of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, who's been leading the way in creating a whole series of reforms that we played out over these 3 years in corrections and other areas. And Mindy Tarlow, our Director for the Office of Operations, who's been deeply involved in all the policy changes we made, but also spent decades managing programs that helped folks who come out of jail and come out of prison get back on their feet. So she also has tremendous expertise. Look, the name of the game is to constantly reduce mass incarceration. There's been a burning issue, not just in the city, but in this country in recent years, an issue that was bluntly not talked about for decades until finally the dam burst just in the last few years. And really on a bipartisan level, this conversation engaged all over the country. Recognition that we as a nation had gone astray. We as a city had gone astray. We were incarcerating huge numbers of people. And it wasn't making us better. It was really fundamentally destroying lives. Folks who were incarcerated, who didn't have to be or didn't have to be for so long, or could have been rehabilitated or didn't have to become recidivists. Families left behind. A cycle of violence and incarceration repeated over and over for decades and wasn't disrupted. We knew in this city that we had to disrupt that. I want to say, you go over the course of years, we have a lot to be proud of in New York City on the plus side, because just like we have for over 20 years driven down crime in this city, for over 20 years, this city has slowly but surely been reducing the number of people in our jail system. It used to be upwards of 20,000 people just 20 years ago, and now under half that, a 55% reduction in the number of people in jail in a typical year over the course of the last 20 years. That's a good start, but it's not enough. We now are more committed than ever to reducing the number of people in jail. We have more work to do to figure out what the future of our jail system looks like. But one thing that cannot be debated is we have to keep driving down mass incarceration. Now, I want to put the horse before the cart. I would argue the number one thing we can do is to continue our efforts to reduce crime so there aren't people being arrested and being put into the system to begin with. And those efforts continue to be successful. And that makes me very hopeful about the future of ever decreasing jail population. And there's a lot of things that folks who worked in this area have talked about for years and years, and they've been right all along. They said this is directly connected to poverty, it's directly connected to lack of educational opportunities. That's all true. Obviously, we have, for these last 3 years, focused intensely on addressing income inequality, addressing poverty, creating economic opportunity, improving our schools, improving the kinds of things that would particularly change the life path of a young person like pre-K. There's much more to do. But as you think about a long-term plan here that we are building, one part of it is driving down crime. One part of it is fixing the root causes as much as we humanly can. And another part of it is reducing recidivism. Because even if people like Leviticus have one moment where they stumble, if they never stumble again, then they'll never experience our jail system. Leviticus, you obviously are on a good path. And we want to support you and any other person who's on that path of turning their life around so they never see the inside of a jail cell again. And let's face it, that has not been the history. The history had been too many people got in trouble once, as you described it, Stan. Once led to another time, led to another time. But we know it doesn't have to be that way. We know that that first time can be made the last time if we provide the support that people need from the beginning. So what we're announcing today is a series of actions that will change how we approach anyone who is incarcerated in our jail system, and particularly change our approach to those who have been sentenced and served time because they were convicted and sentenced of a crime. Let me describe the approach we're going to take, but as I do want to note, even in the last 3 years, just 3 years, and we're proud to have built upon previous success and make it go even faster now. The jail population in this city has declined 18% in the last 3 years since we've been here. And congratulations to Liz and Joe and Mindy and so many other people on this team who have been working intensely on this. Jail population down 18% since I came into office. The population on Rikers Island is down 23% in the last 3 years. Because remember, we have a jail system beyond Rikers Island. So in fact, we've done even better at reducing the number of people on Rikers. This, again, is the most profound way to address mass incarceration. Make sure people don't get there to begin with. I mentioned how much of an impact crime reduction has played in this, and I guarantee you that neighborhood policing is going to allow us to do a lot more to drive down crime and therefore to drive down our jail population. But I also want to note that initiatives like alternative sentencing programs that keep people out of jail, like Leviticus described, and bail reform that is causing fewer people to end up in jail simply because they couldn't afford bail. These initiatives are having an impact already and are part of this important decline. We have the lowest incarceration rate, in fact, of any city in the United States, any major city. I want to be clear. The lowest incarceration rate of any major city in America. And I'll break for Liz to give the comparison we talked about earlier. Our incarceration per 100,000 versus the city that unfortunately is at the high end of this, Philadelphia. Why don't you give them that comparison?
So in New York City, we're at about 164 people per 100,000 that are incarcerated. In Philadelphia, sadly, that number is at about 810 people per 100,000. And in other big cities like Los Angeles and Chicago and a few others, they hover around 290 to 300. So we are, as the mayor says, at one of the lowest rates of any big city in the U.S.
So that is a great foundation to build on. Today we're announcing a series of new initiatives. First of all, by the end of this August, for every inmate in our jail system, we will now be providing 5 hours per day, every weekday, 5 hours per day of education and training programs. Now, if you don't have a frame of reference, you might not be able to see what that impact is. 5 hours every day, people who previously were getting less than 1 hour every day. 4 years ago, the average was less than 1 hour of education and training per inmate per weekday. 5 hours of education and training means a serious commitment to getting people back on track, whether it's getting a GED or getting skills in a trade that can then be the basis for employment after getting out of jail. It's intensive, it's focused, it's practical. By the way, it's one of the reasons that we've been able to drive down violence. When people have something positive and productive to do, anywhere, including behind bars, it changes behavior. When you have nothing to do or you feel like you're in a dead end, it has a negative impact on behavior. But we know that education and training reduces violence, improves inmate behavior, and obviously sets the stage for success once they're out of jail. That'll be in place by the end of August. A study was done in 2013 by the U.S. Department of Justice. The study looked at these kind of education and training programs in prison and jail settings and found that they resulted in an over 40% reduction in recidivism. So not only does it make the situation safer while someone's in jail, not only does it increase the chance of a productive life outside of jail and after jail, also sharply reduces recidivism. Again, getting us back to the point that then we can bring down the jail population further. Further, want to announce that by the end of this year, every individual in Department of Correction custody will receive reentry services throughout their experience in jail. They will literally see a counselor on the very first day in jail who will begin the process of determining how they will reenter society as soon as their time in jail is over. So it will be a continuous process from the first day in the door, and the message will be, literally on the first day, this is a temporary reality. This does not need to be your future. We're going to help you turn it around. We have, in addition to all the people who go through Rikers every year, because you know, people go into Rikers who are charged, go to trial. Many are found innocent. Many end up in some other situations that does not lead them to actually serve additional time after a sentence. But about 8,500 New Yorkers are sentenced, do serve time based on a conviction, and end up leaving Rikers after sentencing, after serving time every year, about 8,500. That group of individuals, unfortunately, have a substantial recidivism rate. If you're in Rikers, I want to remind everyone up front, and Joe and Liz and Mindy can explain this in more detail, but if you're in Rikers on a sentence, in the scheme of things, you have done a less major crime. If you've done more major, more violent crimes, you end up, of course, in the state prison system. If you're in Rikers for a sentence, it means it's a year or less. But still, we've seen a very intensive and troubling recidivism rate because so many of those individuals didn't get any kind of follow-up services historically. They didn't get any kind of connection to a better future. So the third initiative I'm announcing today is called Jails to Jobs. And this will also be in place by the end of this year. Every one of the 8,500 inmates who is sentenced and then leaves Rikers at the end of their sentence each year, every one of the 8,500 will be offered transitional employment directly. They will be given a direct and immediate offer of transitional employment through organizations like the Fortune Society. These will be short-term paid jobs that the city will fund and will allow these individuals to get back on their feet. It'll be a universal opportunity. We have found, again, through studies by the nonprofits that have done this work, that when you provide a short-term job opportunity immediately out of jail, it reduces recidivism by 22%. So these are two different concepts, and they come together. Provide a job opportunity immediately out of jail, recidivism goes down 22%. Provide education and training during the time in jail, recidivism goes down 40%. Combine those two concepts, recidivism goes down even more. Keep driving down recidivism, and you keep driving down jail population. For these individuals, the transitional employment often leads to longer-term employment. And they get an opportunity to have counseling, peer mentoring along the way, and if for some reason they don't get immediate opportunities for employment, they stay connected to Fortune Society and other organizations and keep coming back until they do get that employment. So look, we believe this is part of what will make us all safer. You know, for a lot of New Yorkers, they don't think a lot about our jail system. But they do think about safety. So I want people to understand this is about reducing recidivism and therefore reducing crime. It is about asking the taxpayers to pay a lot less, because the more we shrink our jail system, the less we have to put into it financially. But first and foremost, it's about making people's lives better. It's about helping people who went on the wrong path to get on the right path and stay on the right path. It is both the humane thing to do and the practical thing to do. And we know it'll make neighborhoods safer. And we know it'll make families whole. We are the safest big city in the country. As I've said many times when I talk about the NYPD, we don't rest on that laurel. We have to keep innovating. I feel the same way about Department of Correction. Department of Correction over the last 3 years has innovated constantly and is continuing to do so with these new initiatives. This is the path to an even safer future. A few words in Spanish. Estamos anunciando nuevos pasos para reducir el número de presos en nuestras cárceles. Vamos a ofrecer 5 horas de programas cada día para cada recluso. Nuestra meta es romper el ciclo de reincidencia que destruye tantas vidas. With that, we'd like to take questions on these new initiatives, and then we will take questions on any and all other topics. Rich.
Mr. Mayor, are these programs mandatory for the inmates or prisoners, or are they optional?
I'll start and pass to Joe Pont. Look, we believe, in terms of the time in jail, that there's a tremendous desire amongst inmates to have these opportunities. When they come out, by definition, we're offering an opportunity. Maybe not everyone's going to take us up. Maybe some have another kind of good option they can turn to. I mean, that's the optimal situation. Maybe they worked before and they get a chance to go back to that work, or their family has prepared a positive reentry for them. So once they come out, of course, they have the right to make their own choices, but we think it's going to be a very appealing option. But in jail, I think a lot of what I've heard, certainly, including from visiting Rikers and talking to inmates, is this is the kind of thing that they really want, because that idle time makes them very, very frustrated. Joe?
So it will be voluntary, but
Microphone closer.
it will be voluntary, but inmates have participated at very high rates in these types of programs. Everybody wants hope coming out of jail or prison, and I think these programs give people hope in the fact they can return to the community in a safe and productive manner.
David?
During this press conference, the Manhattan DA put out a press release about investing $15 million in reentry programs for folks coming out of state facilities, I guess, and back to New York City. And I'm wondering, he's quoted in your press release, but he's not here today. And how does this, what you're announcing here, interact with what he's talking about? And how much is this going to cost that you're talking about?
I'll start with that last piece. This is the, for the initiative on transitional employment. It is a $10 million initiative, which will be part of our executive budget proposal. And Liz Glazer can speak to the DA situation.
So the DA is essentially doing two things. One is to create a resource hub, and the second is some of the actual services themselves. We've been working closely with them on both of those things. We think the resource hubs could be a terrific piece of life after Rikers or jail, or for anyone in the community who's looking for services of a whole array of things. And with respect to the services themselves that they're now putting out an RFP on, we've been working with them on sort of what that might look like and how that could fit into the array of services that we have.
Was Manhattan DA invited to this event? Why isn't he here to talk about it?
Sometimes things are a coincidence, and so
So we're fully
What is this?
supportive of what he's
we're
doing.
absolutely, completely. And in fact, just wanted to sort of add to that, and we have some members here today. We have a Reentry and Diversion Council that has really sort of pushed and created many of the ideas, some of which the mayor is announcing today. And we have, I see, a whole range of our members here today, and the Manhattan DA is a member of that as well. And in fact, one of his staff co-chairs one of the subcommittees that created a number of these programs.
Juliet?
Yeah, when you talk about the short-term jobs, what is considered short-term and what kind of jobs?
So I'll start with the short term is up to 2 months. The experts here will tell you why the evidence is that that works and that it proves to have a very big difference in terms of people getting to longer term jobs. But the fact is, I want to sort of put a little bit of the emotional quality to this, but I think my colleagues can speak to this as well. From what I've understood about incarceration, you feel at the end of it totally disconnected. You knew one life, and that's gone, and suddenly you're in this entirely controlled environment, and then suddenly you're back out in the world again. Levitas just talked about, not knowing what to do next. And the notion here is to give people an immediate place to go. Not only will you have had the whole year of your reentry being worked on with you, and the education and training on top of that, but then imagine you're finally going through those doors back out to freedom, and the message is, here's where we want you to go, and you're going to have a job when you get there. It's a whole new reality in terms of getting people on a positive track. Would either of you like to comment about that?
Sure, that's absolutely right. I mean, it's twofold. One, it exposes employers to people who are formerly incarcerated, and it really diminishes and breaks down all the stereotypes employers have about whether or not formerly incarcerated people can be trustworthy, and et cetera, and et cetera. So it provides an opportunity for employers to learn about how well and how good formerly incarcerated people can be as employees. And two, it provides a platform for formerly incarcerated people who don't have work experience to get the kind of work experience that allows them to be competitive in the market. We have a transitional work employment program. 80% of our people who go through that program end up with permanent jobs. We also find that employers all their stereotypes sort of are washed away when they say, wow, this guy, this girl is really good. Thank you for allowing them to come into my workplace. And then we become a sort of recruiter for that employer. So it really works in a number of ways.
And what kind of jobs are we talking about? What types of jobs?
It ranges. We have social service, we have hotel industry, we have food industry. We try to make as many pathways into as many markets as possible. We do try to look at what are some of the emerging markets and make sure people are being competitive and access into those markets, but it's really about getting people exposed.
Let me ask, between all of my colleagues, I think describing actual jobs would be helpful. What kind of work do you do very specifically? And again, that point about the difference between what are the outcomes for those who go through transitional employment versus those who just walk out the door and have to find their way. Who can speak to those?
Yeah, well, I'll speak to just the last piece, and I think Mindy is speak to the other. So, the research shows over and over again that those, 30, 60 days when you first walk out the door is when you're most vulnerable. And so the most important thing is to have immediacy. And I think many of the organizations in this room, Fortune Society, that's what they recognize, that we need to have a way to wrap services around people and to sort of meet them where they live. So I think that's the most important thing. And the transitional job surely is transitional, but it's immediate. And Mindy, maybe you want to talk about them, what the handoff ends.
I first want to really compliment what Stan said and his description of both Fortune, which is a wonderful program, and also the employment programs that they offer. But I also think that transitional employment can take a number of forms. Some of it can just be literally learning how to work, learning the basic skills that you need to show up on time, to be supervised, to work with colleagues, et cetera. And those kinds of transitional employment opportunities can sometimes be provided by the nonprofit provider themselves as a paid internship, if you will. And sometimes it can be in more of a work crew environment. I'm sure you're all familiar with summer youth employment. It's a similar style work crew kind of model, which also helps with peer support and that sort of thing.
One of you talk about specific jobs. Again, I want to give them the examples.
Sure. The food industry is one industry that we have great relationships with.
What kind of jobs?
Cooks, bussing.
All right, we're getting somewhere.
Bussing. We have construction jobs, people who are out there flagging. There's a number of positions we have. We have internships and transitional works, and our residential aides, which are sort of frontline counselors, security. So it depends. We try to get in as many markets as we can.
And try to market the individual. But to your point about construction work and connecting it to the on-island training, the OSHA certification that is provided in part of the on-island training, you can't walk on a construction site without that. So this is one of the ways the two things link together.
Right. Okay, I'm going to put a point on that, and I just want you to finish the point about how much it increases the chances of getting long-term employment. That's a really key example, that OSHA certification. A lot of people would like that. Here's a chance for someone to get a real pathway. You get a piece of training that gets you on a track. Now, let's face it, a lot of these are younger folks who something went wrong along the way. They didn't complete their education, maybe even a little bit older folks who didn't complete their education, didn't get skills, something got disconnected. If we can give them that education and that training while they're in jail and they're ready to go back into society, we're making up for lost time. And so something like an OSHA certification, that's a hard skill, that's a hard fact that you can bring to the equation. Talk about the increased chance of longer-term employment.
The study that the mayor referred to earlier that had the 22% reduction in recidivism, in that study, which was a short-term transitional employment study, the link to full-time employment was about 70%, whereas the control group, if you will, was about 30% in that first year post-study.
So I'm going to say that in a little less academic knowledge. So if you were in one of these up to 8-week transitional job programs, your chance of getting a long-term job was 70%. If you were not in one of these programs, your chance was about 30%. We believe fundamentally if you get a job and you stick with a job, your chance of ending up in jail again goes down substantially. Andrew.
Comparing what's happening to what you're doing right now. Right now, sentenced inmates at Rikers are not just cast out into New York City, have a nice life. You already have job counseling and you're linking folks with the Fortune Society and other organizations. So is the new part of this the guarantee that
yes.
You're getting the short-term? And when do those inmates start getting told you're guaranteed a job? When does that communication take place?
There are 3 guarantees. That's what's the news here. Again, just 4 short years ago, people got less than an hour of programming a day. We are now guaranteeing consistent programming for every single inmate. The 5 hours per inmate, and that will be in place this year. We are guaranteeing that the reentry services will begin as soon as you get there and continue throughout your time there. That, again, was not consistent across all people, all inmates. And we are guaranteeing a transitional employment opportunity if you choose to take it. That has not been a guarantee previously. We're talking about 8,500 people, a substantial number of people every year. We're guaranteeing each and every one of them a transitional employment opportunity My colleagues can talk about it, but I think the simplest way to say it is those three things were not guaranteed previously.
What I mean, though, is when will the inmates be told that you're guaranteed a job?
Joe, Liz?
So I think, what everyone in reentry says is reentry must begin on day one. So day one, when people come into Rikers and they go through a whole screening to figure out what kind of programming is appropriate for them, they'll know what the program is.
And it will be fully in place by the end of this year. Right. So we'll start telling people when we are in a position to guarantee the outcome. Way in the back.
Good point.
Mr. Mayor, could you just explain a little bit more specifically how you were able to get those numbers down over the last 3 years in jails? And also, just as a follow-up, what would you say to New Yorkers who might see that and think, I'm concerned that maybe people are out of jail who should be in jail, specifically quality of life? Very,
very fair questions indeed. I would say to my fellow New Yorkers, look at the way crime is going down. I'll make a parallel here. You know, for a long time, particularly during 2013, 2014, there was a big back and forth. Would the reduction in stop and frisk make us safer or less safe? Many of us kept saying it will make us safer. We've now proven that over 3 years running very, very consistently. We believe fundamentally that there are a lot of things that can be done to keep people out of the jail system while keeping us safe to begin with. Meaning a lot of folks who committed very low-level offenses, and we believe if they're not in jail, can be managed properly, can be helped to a positive outcome. But second, we also know that going to jail, unfortunately, historically, has for many people been a trigger to becoming a part of criminal life. It's not a newsflash, we know this. We want to keep as many people away from the jail experience as is appropriate. Now, look, if someone did a very serious, if someone committed a crime and they're sentenced, they're going to end up at minimum in Rikers. If they did something more serious, they're going upstate. But there are a lot of people that never needed to get to Rikers to begin with. So every time we can get there, intervene, we believe it's actually reducing the long-term likelihood of that person being involved in the criminal justice system and any violence that might come out of that. We also know that for those who it was the first time, there's a much greater chance of turning their life around and, again, not having that recidivism if you intervene. So these numbers, like Mindy just pointed out about the difference for the folks who get the transitional employment versus the folks who don't, these are very striking numbers. And these recidivism numbers I mentioned, the fact is the problem was we weren't doing it consistently. And we came to the conclusion that this needs to be universal because it's working and we could reach a lot more people. And I think the point Liz made was very powerful. If you come in the door on day one and you're told, we want this to be the last time we'll ever see you. You know, you made a mistake, but we want this to be the last time we'll ever see you. We're going to do all these things, including when you come out, you go right into a job. I have really fundamentally believe that will make us safer in the long run.
And Mayor, can I
Please.
So I just wanted to add to that because this was really a very intentional effort of not just our offices, but of many, many folks around the cities, DAs, defenders, courts, and others to intentionally drive the population down, and the work continues. And essentially, as the mayors have pointed out, there are two ways to do that. You stop people from going in who shouldn't be in because they could be out, they're low risk, and you reduce the amount of time that people stay at Rikers. And so you can see on our website what all those numbers are, but basically what has happened to the jail population, to your point, is that the number of low-risk people has dropped dramatically. And just to give you an example, we're down 25% as far as misdemeanors. We're down something like 36% of people who otherwise would have been held on bails of under $2,000. So one is stopping the number of people who go in, and the second, much more complicated, but where we're also making some strides, is reducing the amount of time that people stay.
And I would say investing in people in jails is investing in community safety. When I look at my own situation, I, as I said, got my GED when I was in prison, went to college when I was in prison. That investment, that opportunity allowed me to come home, get a job, take my son out of foster care because my son was in foster care, marry the woman I love, been married now for 25 years, raised 4 kids, purchased a house in the Bronx. I'm giving back in ways that I hope I'm making amends to the community I hurt for so many years. So investing in people in prison and coming home from jails is an investment in community safety.
Man. Rosie.
So 85% of people are pre-trial on Rikers, right? And they're spending months waiting for their court date. Are they losing jobs while they're doing that? How many people are coming in that had jobs as compared to who's unemployed?
Interesting question.
We don't have those numbers, but obviously the disruption in the normal life of an individual could cost them their job. So that's part of the system and part of Liz's work on speeding up the court processing. That's all part of diverting people who don't need to be in jail so we don't disrupt their lives like that.
So just, we do have one number, which is that with respect to the city sentence folks, who are those 85,
80 or something like that.
Which is the population that we're focusing on, about 73% of them had no full-time activity at the time that they were arrested.
The guarantee only applied to people who have been sentenced?
Sentenced.
Correct.
So not to the people who are
Not pretrial detention.
I'm going to restate and
I'm sorry.
no, you were fine. I'm saying I'm going to just summarize. I want you to correct me if I miss anything. The transitional employment is only for those sentenced, but the broader efforts to prepare people for reentry and to provide education and training are across the board. Whether you're correct, that's for anyone who comes in the door. Jillian.
On the 5 hours of programming, can you explain a little bit more about what's new there? Because I had written back in 2015 about the DOC saying they were going to fund this to the tune of, tens of millions of dollars over a couple of years, and that they were hoping to be providing 5 hours of programming a day to adult inmates by March 2016, which of course was a year ago.
They will talk to you about the final play out of this. What we're saying is we're guaranteeing a very specific, you said hope to, keyword. A lot of us hope to do things in government. We're now locking down timelines. We're saying exactly that all these things will be in place this year, and they will be universal guarantees. You want to speak to?
No, just the overall scheme of trying to do all those things in these facilities. Some of it was creating program space, hiring staff, so the contracting, the vendors, all those things took more time. But as the mayor said, by August of this year, there'll be 5 hours for every inmate in our system.
And just one other thing, Julian, before you go on. This is us putting ourselves on the hook. This is something we do with some consistency. We're saying we're giving you a standard that you can hold us accountable to. That this is going to be for everyone.
Is there new money associated with this, or is it those old allocations that had come in?
For sentenced folks, the transitional employment is the $10 million, and that is new, and that will be an exec. On the programming and education and the reentry, go ahead.
It's not new money, it's money that's in our budget now.
Okay, Dave.
The good that you're talking about today, these 3 things, and then also the fact that Rikers' population has been reduced 22%. And I don't know if
23, Dave.
23%. I don't know if they're connected or not, but it jogged my memory a couple of weeks ago was the governor talking about conditions are so bad at Rikers, he thinks that it should close down. So I guess, does this fly in the face of that? Is this in reaction to what he has said? What?
It's certainly not in reaction to what he said. These are things, as you've heard, that have been worked on now for 3 years. My simple point would be, our obligation is to every day improve the situation on Rikers, and by the way, in the other jails as well. I want to keep emphasizing, everything we're talking about today is system-wide. It's not just Rikers, because we have other jails too. And I think sometimes there's a bit of a simplification in the public discourse about, Rikers there's a host of problems. We don't deny there's a host of problems in Rikers, but somehow everything else gets missed. Those other jails need work too. The jail system needs work. The whole history of our jail system is not a good one. And when we came here, bluntly, and I've said this publicly before, of all the subject matter I work on as mayor, this is the one where I was most surprised at how bad things were, and how many mistakes had been made in the past and how many lost opportunities existed. And even with that, there was decline of population. That's a very good thing. But No, a situation at Rikers, the status quo at Rikers, is not acceptable to us, and we've been continuing to change it, and we have to do that for people who are there right now. We're also going to make some decisions in the near term about what to do with the future of Rikers and the future of our jail system overall. And I've said to you guys repeatedly, we will do that by the time of the executive budget in the next weeks. So clearly we're going to be giving you a bigger vision. But one thing that will be true even with that bigger vision, we have to do stuff immediately. For those 8,500 people I mentioned who are sentenced every year, they need help now. We need to break that cycle now. So these are things we can do on top of all of the things that have been done to reduce violence on Rikers in the jail system, all the things that have been done to decrease the amount of weapons and contraband coming in. There's a whole host of reforms underway. Those all have to continue however we sort out the future.
And
way back.
Can I say this,
hold
man?
on one second.
This really is about investing in people. For me, this is a moment to celebrate. This isn't about the conditions of confinement. This is about how do we invest in people? How do we build people? Fortune's tagline is build people, not prisons. This is an opportunity that this mayor is saying we are going to invest in building people, giving people a second chance, building a pathway out of incarceration. And I just want us to take this moment and pause it for a moment because it is an opportunity to build people.
Amen. Way back, way back.
Would the federal budget cuts, as they're being discussed in Washington, impact any of this? And also, you talked about everyone deserves. Would there be a third chance, a fourth chance? In other words, someone who goes through the system, goes back out, makes a mistake, comes back in. Would they be offered the same opportunity?
Let me start on the first point, and I'll offer my layman's view on the second point and pass to my colleagues. Most important thing I want to say about the proposed federal budget cuts is they are proposed. And I also want to say that that first iteration of the next federal budget, remember the quote-unquote skinny budget, did not cover a whole host of things and didn't give us a lot of detail. I'm not expert, I don't know if my colleagues are, on if there was anything that specifically might affect the initiatives we're talking today. I don't know of anything that would, but I also know we're going to be fighting with colleagues all over the country a whole host of the cuts that were proposed in the budget. And I think everyone would agree since last week, the playing field has shifted with the defeat of the ACA repeal, and that has an immediate domino effect on the budget and on tax reform because the whole master plan on the Republican side was to get the ACA repeal first and theoretically open up a bunch of money for other things they want to do. That's not there now. So that's going to affect a lot of what's going to happen, I think, on the budget cuts too. On the question of rehabilitation and recidivism, look, I think we have a particular focus on folks who are going through the system the first time, where we think there's an extraordinary opportunity for turnaround, and Leviticus is a great example of that. There are circumstances in terms of repeat offenders that are more positive or possible, and others that are less so. Let me have the experts tell you how we would draw those lines.
So I don't think we should quit on people, as Stan says. We're dealing with people. People make mistakes. Obviously, in the criminal justice world, if you commit a more serious crime, then the likelihood you're going to be involved in this program on Rikers would be limited because you're probably then going to go to the state prison system. But people do make mistakes, and I think we need to have the programs available. At the time people are stepping up to develop and to improve their situation, we ought to be ready to help them in that situation. So.
Okay. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, a lot of the issues that you're talking about today actually have very direct connection to the quality of the schools in a variety of neighborhoods where most people that wind up on Rikers come from and live in. The real life skills that you're talking about here and the jobs programs are often things that are missing from those school experiences prior. Have you looked at those school districts and these types of life skills that are not necessarily for the folks where I know you're trying to encourage a college-going education system, but these types of skill programs?
Sure. Yeah. Look, I have a huge critique of what's happened historically on education, and I think it directly relates to mass incarceration, period. There hasn't been an honest and sincere effort to, over decades, over generations, to truly educate all of our children. What we're attempting to do, and we started it with universal pre-K for all, is change the very nature of our school system. The biggest thing we will do, I believe, is getting all our kids reading on third grade level by third grade. That is the ultimate difference maker in education. And I believe it's a lot of evidence, just like kids who get pre-K, less chance of ending up involved with criminal justice. Kids reading on grade level by third grade, less chance of being involved with the criminal justice system. In terms of what you pointed to up ahead, even though we're trying to create a college-going culture, it's with a very clear message that not every child wants to choose college, and that there's going to be lots of career opportunities too. The career and technical education is going to be, pretty richly available throughout our school system, and more with a focus on modern opportunities. In this city, that would be tech, that would be life sciences, that would be film and TV, that would be healthcare, et cetera. So I think that's going to be more appealing to a lot of young people and pull them toward it. But the other thing that's very specific to your question is the single shepherd program. Remember, District 7 and District 23 in our school system, meaning the South Bronx and not Central Brooklyn in general, but the part of Central Brooklyn that's been the toughest to address in terms of crime issues, which is Brownsville and some of the surrounding areas. That's where we're giving every child and their family a direct counselor throughout their time in school from 6th grade to 12th grade, to try to get ahead of anything that might suggest a drift towards trouble. And we specifically designed that every family had that guarantee they would have a counselor, and not just the child, but the whole family would be brought in. So I think these are some of the things that could disrupt that historic cycle, but we need to, achieve all those things if we want to stop having our school system be a part of the problem. Yeah.
EMTC opened in the 60s with pretty much these promises: counseling when you come in, training, etc. It went by the wayside as crime spiked, the economy went in the toilet. What guarantee do we have that this is not going to suffer the same consequences?
I'll start, and my more learned colleagues will jump in. I think we should be very pleased that we're living in a different time. The 60s and 70s were a time of decline in New York City, writ large. The a lot of neighborhoods were suffering from disinvestment. A lot of people were leaving. We had profound crime problems that were not being addressed. We had drug problems that were not being addressed. Later, even after that, the murder rate continued to go up. Shootings continue to go up. The crack epidemic, I could go on and on. I think we're in a profoundly better place today. And I want to give credit to everyone, right? I mean, all my predecessors and folks in the private sector who invested in everyone, and all the people at the community level who stood and fought and helped to turn things around. We have a much better platform for success. I'm very comfortable saying I'm blessed, and we're all blessed to have a better playing field to play on. Now I think we can make these things stick better. We've got over 4.3 million jobs in our economy right now and growing. So when we do transitional employment programs, we have some place that there's a chance people could actually transition to, because jobs continue to be created. We see declining crime, so the atmosphere that people are going back to is different. We're disrupting gangs more and more, so making that less of an option for people to choose. Obviously, with the Cure Violence movement, which we've invested a lot in, is also very important and complementary here. Working on people, Cure Violence is doing a parallel reality that when folks come back to the neighborhood, they're connecting with them immediately and trying to keep them away from bad influences and problems. So there's a lot that's different from those times. Anyone want to speak to why that didn't work and we think this will?
I think we're looking at prison systems today much differently than before. I mean, I started 40 plus years ago, and the thought was when people came into the system, tried not to do any harm. I mean, tried not to make them any worse than when they came in. Now we feel much better about the evidence to say we can actually help them do better. And most systems around the country, including here in New York, have just changed that model. That we can help people, and it's not the punishment of incarceration is going to change them. It's what we do while they're here that's going to change them.
What happens if someone doesn't want to hire one of the 8,500 people? What do you do with them?
What if you're saying if no one wants to hire them?
Either because they're not qualified or because there's just not a job for them.
Let me make sure I want to just get the question right. There are jobs in New York City. We can all agree on that. If you're saying, what if you have someone who, despite every effort, no one will hire? Yeah. Okay, I'm not sure we would accept the, I'm not saying it's an unfair premise, I'm saying I'm not sure we'd accept the premise. I don't know, maybe there are some individual with some challenge they're facing that makes it very hard for them to hire, but I think we would say there's lots of jobs, there's a constant need. We don't think it's ever been tried universally, so we don't think that's the problem, I would argue. I mean, these are the experts, I'd argue we don't think that's the problem we're going to face by and large.
I absolutely agree. But I wanted to go back to why now this might work when it didn't work when EMTC first opened up. Plain and simple, I think if the leadership of the city, the mayor, believes in investing in people, this city is going to invest in people. If we can have an honest conversation with the communities most impacted by incarceration, if we can have a conversation with the people most impacted by Rikers Island and begin to lean in and begin to support people, it will be sustained. It really is about leadership, it's about commitment, and it's about vision. And what we're hearing today, and what I know of my years of cycling in and out of jail, is if you have a vision about what things could be, people will lean to that vision and support it. And I think we're at that moment in time right now as a city where we could really lean in.
I'll add one other very important sort of civic and political point, the mass incarceration movement, which, you know, you've watched this thing. I mean, you know, you've got some of the most progressive voices in the country involved, and you've got the Koch brothers involved, for God's sake. I mean, it's extraordinarily bipartisan. And, you know, that discussion got a little derailed by November 8th and the very colorful events that have happened since November 8th. But it didn't go away. It's going to be back to the fore, because I think what happened on mass incarceration is the country looked itself in the eye and said, wait a minute, this is not right. I mean, I think people of all backgrounds and ideologies got very troubled by the fact that we sent a whole generation of people away in so many cases wrongly. And then I think there was another impulse, including from the libertarian, you know, not the party, but the philosophical piece of the equation. A lot of people are like, why are we spending this much money on jails and prisons when we can have people back in society and support them in better and more cost-effective ways? So I would say that's a huge difference. I think you would agree that in the 60s, 70s, 80s, unfortunately, a consensus developed like, let's build as many prisons as possible, a horrible backward mistake. Whereas today, more and more the answer is let's, you know, get to as small a jail and prison system as possible. Anna.
Do you ever consider opening smaller borough jails, particularly on Staten Island? You know, there's been a lot of history with opposition to that.
Yeah, there has been a lot of history with opposition. And what I'd say is we're going to, as I said, over these next few weeks leading up to the executive budget, we're going to come up with a vision for the future. But we're mindful of that opposition. And, you know, I've tried to be blunt in this whole process that the choices we face come with real challenges, real expense, real issues about what communities will feel. And I want to remind everyone, because this is pertinent to the conversation on homelessness too. I always want to pay attention to what communities feel while balancing the greater good and trying to figure out what's a fair balance. But when it comes to something like the siting of a jail, that is a ULURP question. That means that's going to go through a whole elaborate process, and a city council member, and we all know this, everyone knows it, the individual city council member will have a disproportionate impact. To date, I have not heard of a lot of city council members who have said, hey, you know, that's what I'd like in my community. So, and I don't think that's necessarily right. I mean, I think this is another thing we have to accommodate as part of changing people's lives and making our city better, but I also am not surprised by that reality. So, what I would say is, no, I do not have a specific vision at this hour. I'm going to come forward with a bigger plan, but I don't start with any assumption about what additional facilities would look like and where they would be. That's not something I have resolved.
As a follow-up to that, on Staten Island in particular, a couple decades ago, there was a political deal where like Staten Island wouldn't get a new jail, but they'd get more homeless shelters, and neither of those happened. Do you think you'd ever consider a political swap like that?
Well, I don't like the notion of a quote-unquote political swap to begin with. What I have said very clearly is, and we have the ability to do this, the city has the ability to site homeless shelters, is we will put homeless shelters in place in Staten Island to address the need on Staten Island, the population on Staten Island. That is a given. That is now the policy of New York City. But again, I do not have a vision yet on where, if, how we're going to look at the way we handle other jail facilities. Yoav.
I'm just wondering what you might say to someone who's unemployed and might hear about this program and wonder how it's fair that someone who's committed a crime is guaranteed a job, but they're not.
First of all, we've said very bluntly, they're guaranteed a job for up to 8 weeks. Thereafter, they have to get a job. We'll do everything we can to help them get a job, but the guarantee is up to 8 weeks. And I would say it's a smart investment for everyone. Getting someone out of the cycle of crime and incarceration is in everyone's interest. And look, it's not something I've experienced in my life, but I know people who have, and I can tell you that we all know people who have probably, and it's part of life, and we have to do better and better at breaking that cycle. And that is in the taxpayer's interest, that's in the community's interest, that's humane, that fits our faith traditions, you go down the whole list. But to folks who are unemployed and have not been incarceration, I would say go to one of our Workforce One centers, which are available to all New Yorkers and can connect people to jobs. And that's available right now for free every single day all over the city. On this topic, yes, Henry.
Given the compelling nature of the argument you just made.
Thank you, Henry.
That the investment.
That was the nicest thing you ever said to me.
Have you made any attempt to get the private sector involved in financing this?
I have not. I don't think this has been part of the discussion so far. I think we would obviously welcome their involvement, but what I would editorialize, and then the experts can follow up. I am not as concerned about them funding the 8-week transitional jobs. I am much more concerned about them providing the long-term jobs. And by the way, we in government should be held accountable for that too. So just to finish the point, my instruction to my team is, what can we do in the public sector and with all of our nonprofit partners who we fund to increasingly find employment opportunities for those returning from incarceration. Let's show that we are walking the walk. But we also need to find more and more partners in the private sector. And I do know, and I have met folks in the private sector who understand that this is one of the most important things they can do, is give those opportunities. So we want to build up a group of people who will do that.
But if you had done it at this stage and had them buy in at this stage, wouldn't that have made it easier for them to buy in totally at the next stage?
I understand it theoretically, I do, but I would say my composite experience with the private sector is they're kind of show me the money people. And we put up our money, we start doing something, I think it's a lot easier to convince them to play their role as well. So I understand the point. It might have been a good thing to do. Here we are. We think we have a lot of opportunity to convince them to get involved. I want to see if there's anything else on this before we open up to others. Yes?
Can you tell us what crimes you were convicted of and what your first brushes with the criminal justice system were?
Why don't we keep that generalized?
Yeah, that's confidential.
Brush with this, was it for like a minor offense?
Yes. Yeah. You can talk about when you first went into the system, but you don't need to talk about the details.
I don't like to disclose that information.
Can you tell us?
Sure, I can tell you. I first went into the system when I think I was 16, 17. I was in for drug sales and a number of other crimes. I can tell you this, what I did was hurt my community, plain and simple, right? I wasn't innocent. I hurt my community. We have a saying here at Fortune, hurt people hurt people. I was hurting. I dropped out of high school, never made it past the 9th grade, never really made it past the 8th grade. I think I was, at that time, socially promoted. So I was really hurting. I didn't believe in the future. I didn't think I had a future. So I went doing the things that I thought would help me, and that was hurt my community. So I've hurt my community. I've had a chance to benefit from incarceration, going to school. They no longer have the college program. We're encouraging the governor to bring back the college program. It really makes a difference. And now at Fortune, I have an opportunity to give back to the city by helping others transform their life.
A couple quick questions. The $10 million, how many years is that for, and for the employment piece?
Per year, right? 10 million per year, yeah.
And are there any Qualifying criteria, the 8,500 that get out of prison, if they have more serious...
Jail, important point. No, I know you're not trying to use a different word. I'm just wanting, for everyone's benefit, you're in jail, if it's Rikers or one of our other jails, short-term sentence of up to a year, therefore a more minor crime. So if you're sentenced to that more minor crime, you come out. Go on.
So my question is, someone might have been sentenced for something minor, but in the past, they might have had something more serious. Perhaps they have gang ties or something that might concern employers. Is there any disqualifying criteria for those 85?
I'm going to start with what I think is a common sense answer and let the experts go after. Look, I think we could all agree if we could rehabilitate someone completely, then what the specific offense was is less important. I think it's a very fair question to say, if someone committed a more negative, more heinous offense, doesn't it suggest they're not going to be rehabilitatable? Very fair question. But I think we would all agree, if you could make someone whole, if you could make them a positive, productive member of society, and if they're going to be out on the streets anyway, because we're talking about people who have been released who have paid their debts to society, we want that to happen. Now, I could friendly amendment your question and say, do we believe there's some circumstances where it's not viable, right, or it's just too hard? I think that's a good question. I'll let the experts answer. But I start from the assumption, if someone can be rehabilitated completely, that is in society's interest in a very big way. Who wants to speak to anything else on that?
Yeah, I would say at Fortune, we don't pay attention to what people did. We pay attention to who they are when they walk through our doors, right? So David Rothenberg, Leviticus said, the crime is what people did. It's not who they are. So for us, the starting point is you want to change your life. You want to look for something brighter, then let's start at that particular point. What you did does not matter. What matters is who are you today? Who are you at this particular moment in time? And we hope to build on that foundation.
Yeah, and generally speaking, if you've done more serious crime, again, you're going to come out of our prison system, so this isn't even applicable. And second, you're probably going to be away for a long time. So, we are implicitly talking about folks, if they're on the street, even if they had a prior offense, if they're on the street, it means they pay their debt to society. See if there's anything else on this way in the back? Yep.
Misunderstanding, but the job guarantee is only for those who have been sentenced.
Sentenced.
For a week.
The 8,500.
And that 8,500, okay, so that's 8,500.
Per year. According to current numbers, 8,500. Obviously, we want to see that number go down because there will be fewer and fewer people going in to begin with. But 8,500 per year sentenced. Jillian?
Clarify who is sentenced to serve their time on Rikers. That's people with a sentence of a year or less. And can you give us a sense of what
Joe
kind
or
of crime
Liz?
generally?
Yeah. Give them real, live, specific crimes.
Sure.
Don't commit the crime. Just tell them about it.
It's things like larceny, things like that.
Give them, what does that mean in English?
Larceny, theft. Somebody's stolen something. So that's the largest number of folks who are in on sentence crimes. And Rikers have committed those kinds of crimes.
And Jillian, I asked this question earlier as a non-lawyer, and so if, for example, if you commit a crime involving a firearm, that's prison, not jail in almost every circumstance, correct?
That's
Joe, you
correct.
want to add
Yeah.
at all? Or?
That's correct.
Okay. Yes.
Do you have any special procedures for sex offenders?
I, for one, we have not discussed this previously, and we obviously want to be sensitive on this matter. But again, we're talking about people who went through Rikers, and correct me, I think generally that's not the venue where sex offenders would be. Is that correct?
The 1 year sentence, that would be generally would not be in the Rikers 1 year sentence.
If a sex offender commits a larceny, they're going
That's
to
correct.
be Rikers.
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
guaranteed employment as well.
They go through the same system, so there's no pre-disqualifiers.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, last call on this one. Yes, Rosie.
I think you said to Anna, like borough jail, that like homeless shelters, borough jails are another thing we need to accommodate as part of changing people's lives and making our city better. That sounds.
Let's clarify. I appreciate your, legalistically, I did say that sentence, but I also said very clearly, we do not have a plan. We will have a plan by the time of the executive budget. So let's take, no, I don't sound partial. You can posit that, but I'm glad you're asking me so I can say, nope, that's wrong. We have, okay, let's call the roll. Where do we have jails right now in New York City? Joe, where do we have jails?
Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Bronx.
Name the exact jails, please, and tell them where they are.
BCBC in Bronx, Manhattan, which is Manhattan Jail in Manhattan, and the Brooklyn Center in Brooklyn.
Okay. Plus Rikers.
Plus the jails on Rikers,
Right.
correct.
So we have 4 different locations now. Rikers is a special circumstance because it's so isolated. The other 3 are in communities. And obviously, we have needed those other 3 by definition to date, and they are in communities.
At those borough jails, or those are just holding?
Generally, no. There may be a few sentences, depending on why, but generally, no, like pretrial, generally.
So to get it back to your point, I'm talking about the history of New York City. We have had to have jails in communities. That is a true historical statement. That is not a commentary on where we are going. When we tell you where we're going to tell you where we're going, and it's going to be very open, and you're going to get to ask a whole lot of questions about it. But we have not made an assumption yet about the future. I'm just responding to Anna's point that in the past, yeah, there have had to be some places where there were jails. It is night and day compared to the homelessness dynamic, where, as you know, I put forward a plan for 90 new shelters, 90 new facilities, even though we're going to be closing a lot of other types of things. So I think there's an apples and oranges dynamic here. Yes, Rich.
Mr. Mayor, what would your sales pitch be to people who philosophically say that they oppose being kind to people who committed a crime?
I would say, first of all, let's remember again that folks coming out of our jails overwhelmingly have committed lesser offenses. Second, I would say, morally, if we can redeem someone, that's what we're all here to do, right? That's true in our faith traditions. That's true in our sense of public service in government. If we can turn someone's life around, that is the right moral thing to do. Third, I would say it's going to help us be safer. So you could have a theoretical discussion, but if I could show you that we could help people leave a life of crime and never go back, I think we'd all agree that's going to make us safer. And finally, I'd say it's in the taxpayer's interest. It costs a lot of money to incarcerate someone. We can make sure they never go back because we made a short-term investment to avoid a much bigger long-term investment. I think in the end, that's the fair thing to do for our city. Way back there.
Just to clarify my question from earlier, when you said that you have stopped people from going in over the last 3 years, does that include quality of life crimes, or are you still committed to fighting those?
Well, let me start, and Liz is going to help me out. I think the whole quality of life crime discussion, and it is somewhat complex, but I also think it's gotten a little off the rails. Most quality of life crime, which is most crime, right, is really low-level stuff. It is, open container. It's littering. It's walking in the park after hours. It's turnstile jumping. There's all sorts of things that, under normal circumstances, unless you have other outstanding, more serious warrants, and you'll catch me if I miss anything here, unless you have other outstanding serious warrants or you're a intensive repeat offender, you're talking about something that increasingly is a summons. It is not an arrest, and therefore it has no reference point to our jail system. Am I so far right?
Yeah, these are not jail offenses. Summonsable offenses you do not go to jail for.
Okay. Let's go to other topics. Mara.
Mr. Mayor, you've been tweeting some about the White House's refusal to call the killing of Timothy Kaufman by a white supremacist who came to New York City to kill black men a hate crime.
Yep.
Has the crime gotten enough attention, and have you given enough attention?
Look, I'm astounded. Let's just stay on the first part, and then I'll speak to the second part. The White House spokesman, Sean Spicer, I don't know what's going on here. We know this was a racist killing. The NYPD has confirmed this guy came to New York City to kill black people. He's exactly like Dylan Roof, who killed 9 people in the church in Charleston. Exactly. And I said then, I say now, this was an act of domestic racist terrorism, plain and simple. How on earth can the White House spokesman not agree with that? So what is Sean Spicer's problem, and what is Donald Trump's problem that they can't come out and say when something is an act of domestic terrorism that that's what it is, and when it's overtly racist? Don't take my word for it. Ask the NYPD. The guy has said out loud to them, he came here to kill black people. I don't know what else there is to know. So it reminds me very vividly of when Donald Trump refused to disavow the KKK and David Duke and acted like, maybe they're not as bad as people make them out to be. If a guy kills someone for a racist reason, call him a racist, call him a terrorist, period. Look, Mara, this was obviously a horrible incident and exceedingly rare. Can't remember another situation exactly like this in recent history in New York City. I think NYPD has made abundantly clear we do not accept any acts of bias, and there's going to be very serious consequences. But this guy, let's be clear, came here on a sick sense of mission and then turned himself in. NYPD was clearly on his trail, but turned himself in and admitted what he did. He thought he was somehow proud of it, which I think is even additionally more sick. But at least the leader of this country should be able to call it what it is.
Sorry, the second part of the question was, have you given enough attention other than your tweets?
I don't know what kind of additional attention the NYPD got the guy. As I said, they were pursuing him immediately, and he turned himself in, but I have no doubt they would have gotten him anyway. And we already have a huge amount of effort in place to stop bias crime. So, and we're also driving down crime overall and murder overall. So I think we're paying a lot of attention to things we have to. I'm asking why the White House can't even acknowledge what it is. Marcia.
Mr. Mayor, last week the Department of Education took pizza and chicken tenders off the menu because they were things like pizza that looked like this, chicken tenders with pieces of metal or bones that people choked on and needed the Heimlich maneuver. I have two questions.
Yeah.
Number one, would you want your kids to eat food like this? And secondly, why were the parents not informed? Where's the transparency?
Marcia, first of all, it's disgusting. I was a public school parent for many years, as you know. Of course I wouldn't want my kids eating that kind of food. It looks dangerous. DOE immediately pulled all of those shipments of food out of the system. They've stopped that supplier from providing anything to us. I don't know enough about what they've told parents in that school or not. I want to make sure there has been. Again, Marcia, I'm going to say about what I know. I don't know that, but I would agree if they haven't informed parents enough, we want them to right away. So I'll certainly direct DOE to be very, very clear with the parents in the school affected. But what I can tell you is that supplier has been suspended, and we're going to make sure that nothing unsafe reaches our kids.
See, I have a follow-up question because they had the problem with the bones last September. What they did was they took it off for a little period of time. They decided to x-ray the chicken, which before it went to the kids. They put it back on the menu in January, and within 6 weeks, big pieces of bones at schools in 4 of the 5 boroughs.
Marcia, again, I don't know the facts. I need to get the facts from DOE, and then I'll happily comment. Jillian.
Mayor, the Conflicts of Interest Board issued an advisory opinion today saying that an elected official should treat contributions to a legal defense fund as a gift, meaning that a person would not be able to accept more than $50 unless it was from a close friend or a family member. I was wondering if you could tell us how this would impact your decision to start a legal defense fund and whether you sought this advisory opinion from the board.
I personally did not, but I think, again, a lot of people have been involved in trying to determine what's the right way to go forward for a legal defense fund, whether it's for me or anyone else. They are, as you know, legal defense funds have been around for decades and decades. And I think very, very clearly are an appropriate tool. Conflict Interest Board has raised a set of concerns. We'll certainly engage them on that and determine what's the right way to proceed. But I haven't gotten a chance to obviously, see or digest what they're saying, but we need to have an ongoing conversation to determine what's the right way to go from here.
Are you skeptical of this $50 limit that they've, put out? In the past, you've cited the Conflict of Interest Board as sort of the arbiter of, what you've done.
Yeah. Now, my understanding is they have said that the situation might require legislation, which is a perfectly fair alternative if it does. I think there's more dialogue to be had because I don't know what they've looked at as the models. Again, legal defense funds are, I didn't come up with the concept. They've been around for decades and decades. I think they're a fair and appropriate tool. We'll have more dialogue with them, but they clearly indicated that there is a way to resolve the issue if needed in a legislative fashion, so that's an option on the table.
So you'd be open to changing the law in the city so that you could accept higher contributions?
Well, not just me. I think the point is if there's a gray area that might need a legislative a way of addressing it, we deal with that all the time in government. If there's something that has not been addressed, it may have to be addressed legislatively, but it may not. This is an initial view from the board. We're certainly going to have more dialogue to work through and show other examples of what's happened in the past. Anna?
There's been this ongoing push to have an aerial gondola go to Staten Island either from Manhattan, Brooklyn, or Bayonne in New Jersey. Just curious what you think about this. Is it even realistic way to reduce commute times? What do you think?
I'm not an expert on it. Look, it's an appealing notion on its face that it would be another alternative for Staten Islanders. And from what I understand, these things are a lot easier to build than they were in the past, but I am not an expert. I don't know how much we're talking about in terms of cost or who would pay for it or any of those kinds of things. But look, it's worth a look, for sure. It's worth consideration. I can't go farther than that, yeah.
Mr. Mayor, is your general approach to the state budget at this point that Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie is your main conduit for negotiation? It seems that you went up to Albany, you didn't meet with Senator Flanagan, you didn't meet with Governor Cuomo. So is it pretty much that at this point that's your approach, is go through Speaker Hastie?
I think it's more complex than that. I would say if the way you phrase it is Carl Hastie has been a close partner, absolutely. As Speaker Hastie and the Assembly have consistently been supportive of the city's needs, absolutely. More than the others, absolutely. But my staff is in daily contact with the governor's team and the state Senate. You know, as I said, I speak to, from time to time, speak to Senator Flanagan. Obviously, I've spoken to the governor over months and years, many times. I think it's fair to say that we have a real partnership with the Assembly. And you can see in the One House budget that they agree with a lot of our key proposals, like the mansion tax, which they energetically embrace. Now, I think it's important on the mansion tax that Senator Savino has come on board as the lead sponsor in the Senate. I know the conventional wisdom is how difficult these things are to get done. I love addressing that conventional wisdom because conventional wisdoms, by the way, conventional wisdom was Donald Trump couldn't become president. I could go through a whole lot of other conventional wisdom for you. Conventional wisdom was we couldn't get pre-K done. Conventional wisdom was, you know, there'd never be a $15 minimum wage in New York State. Conventional wisdom was we'd never get paid family leave done. Conventional wisdom is so wrong so often, it's amazing it's conventional. But we know it's an uphill battle for a mansion tax. But I did 2 teletown halls that had between them had over 40,000 New Yorkers on them, as if anyone wants to think there's not a constituency for a mansion tax. So there's going to be support for this, and we're going to fight over these next days. And this is an idea whose time has come. Assembly's been all over it. I think it's important that a member of the IDC chose to take the sponsorship in the Senate. And you didn't mention, I'm not saying this negatively, you didn't mention the IDC, which is another part of the equation. And, you know, I've been in regular touch with Senator Klein, and my team's been in regular touch with his staff as well. So I think a lot is going to play out in Albany, and we're going to look for opportunities right up to the final minutes, which is, you know too well what happens literally in the final minutes. But we also don't waste a lot of time on the churn in Albany, which is often not productive. We put our ideas out there, find people who are going to go to bat for us, keep going on with our work.
And just quickly, mansion tax seems at the top. What else is at the top right now as you know, you sort of have to narrow
Sure.
what you're pushing there when you talk to Speaker Hastie?
Education aid, where I think we'll make some progress, but we all know that, you know, there's different ways to interpret the education proposals, but, you know, some of what was put forward by the governor we weren't pleased with, and certainly not in consistency with the Campaign for Fiscal Equity decision. But, you know, obviously we're going to fight, and we think there's a lot of energy in the Assembly and in the Senate, both to increase education aid. The housing MOU, which was passed most of a year ago, as everyone knows, and still has not come to fruition. We care deeply about getting that resolved favorably, which includes things like more funding for public housing, especially given the initial Trump budget. I have not seen the Assembly, once again, put forward a robust proposal. We have not seen progress from the Senate or from the governor on that front. We also have not seen the money, by and large, that we were promised 2 years ago in the budget for public housing 2 years ago from the governor. So, and then supportive housing. We do not have even the beginning of an inkling of how the state's commitment on supportive housing is going to play out. We have no plan, no details, no specifics, no timelines, nothing. I hope the budget process will yield that. Yeah.
To what extent should substantiated complaints of police misconduct be public? I know you're trying to revise 50A,
Yep.
But do you think 50A should be entirely scrapped, and if not, why not?
I'm not an expert on all the nuances of 50A, and I think 50A refers to a lot of other matters beyond discipline, if I understand correctly. But what I'd say is the disciplinary record, I think, should be public. We're going to obviously vigorously support legislation in the legislative session, so you'll see the exact wording. But I think that's one thing we have to do, which is the legislative piece, make possible, legally viable to be able to disclose disciplinary records. The other thing has already begun in the NYPD, which is to consistently improve our process, beginning with recruitment and training, and then retraining and supervision. And when there are individuals who have problems, address them very forcefully to make sure we don't have someone with a pattern of problems. And I think you know, look, the case at hand revolves around someone who was very much trained in the old way under Commissioner Kelly. Commissioner Bratton and Commissioner O'Neill fundamentally changed the NYPD. I don't think the story's been fully told, but I can guarantee you it because I've been watching it for over 3 years. They have fundamentally changed life inside the NYPD. They fundamentally changed training. They fundamentally changed the expectations. They changed the composition of the force, you name it. So I think the expectations now, right down to the precinct commander level, are that there needs to be a different relationship between police and community, between officers and the people they encounter. There needs to be de-escalation. I think we're dealing with a very different reality right now.
When you say case at hand, are you referring to Pantaleo?
Yes, I am. Yeah, no, Pantaleo. Yeah, Laura.
I have to ask you 2 questions, and I've tried to think of a clever way to tie them together.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
I just A for effort.
We wrote.
I think what you could say is in New York City, and then ask the first question. You say also in New York City, and you know, really would work.
We have a story this morning on the growing presence of ICE officers in courtrooms. We're picking people up after court proceedings. I know that you've said that the city would stand up to the federal government to protect undocumented residents. Is there anything that your administration can do, or anything that you're asking the Office of Court Administration to do in response to this? That's the first question.
Let me stay on that one. I'll come to the second. And you know, Liz will certainly be a part of these discussions. Look, let's be clear. That's state property. We're really clear about what we're going to do on city property. And what we delineate about Department of Education is going to be true for all of our agencies. And obviously, both our police commissioner and our schools chancellor have been very clear about how their employees will comport themselves. But when we're talking about state property, we have to be respectful of the state's prerogative. We certainly will have that dialogue because it does worry me. It worries me that it is going to create fear, and it worries me that it's going to create a lesser willingness to come forward. For example, if a witness is supposed to testify, you're creating a potential disincentive, which really flies in the face of our approach to public safety. Again, going back as far as Mayor Giuliani, that if folks who witness crimes don't feel they can come forward, that makes us less safe. So I'm worried about it. I don't have a solution. We will engage the Office of Court Administration, and we will, at minimum, try and see if there can be some clear boundaries or guidelines. Go ahead.
I wanted to know, what do you charge each of your tenants in rent currently in your capacity as a landlord?
A couple things. So we have 3 apartments we're renting, one of which is the house I lived in until I was elected. I cannot quote you 2 of them. One that was in the papers recently is $1,825. That was based on a $25 rent increase this time, but the previous time we did a rent freeze. And I don't know, I literally can't quote you the exact figure on the other 2. There's another member of my couple who is more conversant in the management of those properties. But I can tell you this, we have done our own personal rent freezes many times over the last few years. And then other times we will raise the rent if there's a specific thing we had to repair or a specific improvement we had to make. We're not covered by the rent stabilization law, as you know. But our attitude has been, if there isn't a specific reason to raise the rent, we don't raise it. And if there is a specific repair we have to make, then we do.
So just to clarify that, the most recently reported rents for the other 2 were $2,750 and $4,975.
I don't know if that's accurate.
Okay. Would you Can the press office tell us that, or can someone for
The
your...
press office can talk to Shirlane McRae and see how she feels about answering that, but they'll follow up. Go ahead, Yoav.
Mr. Mayor, I wanted to ask you, I guess the health department has banned 2 of the moils from the circumcision practice, but they're refusing to identify who they are. I'm wondering why that is, and also, how do you plan on enforcing the ban, particularly without notifying the community, who to avoid?
Yeah, let me frame this for a moment. I fundamentally believe I had a lot of experience with the community. I want to say at the outset, this is a very diverse, complicated community. Sometimes I think things get reduced a little too much in the discussion of the Orthodox Jewish community. It's hundreds of thousands of people with lots of different communities within it, and different people handle things different ways. But I did feel, as someone who had been very involved in representing the community, including going back to being a councilman who represented Borough Park, that the previous administration's policy was missing the mark entirely. It was creating a lot of sense in the community of being disrespected, that their religious practices were being denigrated or looked down on or interfered with. It was not making children safer, and it did not have, in my opinion, an effective mechanism for improving the safety of kids or for educating the community. We came together with community leaders who represent pieces of the community. They weren't, it's not like anyone can say they speak for the entire Jewish people or any other people. We came together with a group of community leaders who did have major leadership roles. We said, let's find a solution that protects children and respects religious freedom at the same time. But it will require a real group effort, a real team effort. It will require an understanding that if any moil infects a child, that is not in the interest of anyone, the city or the community, for that individual to keep doing that practice. We thought we had common ground, and it would have involved community leaders bringing forward those individuals, identifying them, and getting them out of that work. We tried that for most of 2 years. It did not work. I want to say as plainly as I can. We tried a new policy. I'm convinced the old policy wasn't working. We tried a new policy. It didn't work either, which I'm very unhappy about, because I thought we took a thoughtful approach, and I thought we attempted to be very respectful and communicative, and I'm not happy about the outcome, and I don't think those community leaders did all they could have done. So now we're going to go in a different direction. Now, to your question, we can't, as far as we can understand legally at this moment, because of confidentiality rules related to someone's health status, we can't publish the names overtly. We are looking for some pathway to do that that's appropriate. We can certainly tell those individuals they should stop, participating in this practice. And unfortunately, once they have herpes, it doesn't go away, so they would need to stop permanently. They could participate as sort of a second member of a team undertaking the practice, and someone else does the other element of it, but they can't, if they're going to make sure a child is safe, they can't do it anymore. We're also going to go out and do something that did come out of this last couple of years, which is we got involved with hospitals that serve the community and healthcare providers to ask them to become partners in addressing this, which they have been. We're going to now do a much more intensive effort to educate parents, particularly mothers, as to the dangers of this practice. And we're going to say to them, it's important to ask a moil. If you choose to engage in this practice, that's your right, and we respect religious freedom, but ask the moil if they are infected with herpes, and if they are, you should find a different moil. Simple as that. And I think, having, again, a deep personal experience with the community, I think a lot of parents are going to ask that question. I think a lot of parents are going to set that standard, and I think that could help. But I still am going to keep an open door for community leaders to come back to us and participate and help us solve the problem, which I ultimately believe is in everyone's interest. So, nothing here ends that possibility of cooperation, but, we didn't see it, and so we've decided to go in another direction.
And going to come up with a new approach? Or?
No, I've just described it. We evaluated it. We found it didn't work because it depended on cooperation we didn't receive. Now we're going directly to the parents. We have lots of ways to reach them, not to question their religious rights or freedoms or practices, but to say, this is something where there's a potential challenge to the health of your baby, ask the mohel if they're infected with herpes. Please.
Do you think it's appropriate for any adult individual to suck on the penis of an infant at any time?
Look, when you say it that way, this is a religious tradition. I'm keenly aware of our Constitution, and I've said this many times on this and many other topics. I interpret, I think accurately, the U.S. Constitution to say we respect all faith traditions. It's a very dangerous dynamic to start to say that one faith tradition's practices are a problem and other ones are not. I think the right way as a public servant to look at it is we respect all faith traditions. We set ground rules, obviously, about health and safety. Here we're saying we respect the tradition. It can be done safely. We're going to inform the parents of their rights. If we find any individual has herpes, we're going right at them. We're going to find them directly. We're going to tell them to get out of this work. We think we have real consequences we can create, but we have to be mindful of religious freedom. We also have to be mindful of what will work, which is, again, what I keep coming back to. Previous policy on Bloomberg administration did not work. Facts bear it out. Our policy, sorry to say, did not work. The facts bear it out. We got to try another policy. We got to go back to the well and try again. But to say to people, just abandon your religious tradition and call us later, that's not going to happen. Let's engage the parents and see if we can fix the situation.
Last two.
I'll do a few more. Way back first.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, as you know, lawmakers in Albany are meeting to discuss raising the criminal responsibility age to 18. Right now in New York, 16 and 17
Yep.
will be jail. So the argument is teens, 16, 17 and younger, when they were released.
Yep, I know.
Fall right back into the same.
Yeah.
So just your remarks on that, is something going to be
We have to raise the age. It's as simple as that. We have to raise the age. You know, everyone knows there's only 2 states in the country that haven't done it. I'm sick of this, self-congratulatory tone about New York State that we're so progressive when we don't have the proper age for dealing with our young people. We have some of the most backwards election laws in the country. I mean, I'm proud of the historic New York progressive tradition. I'll invoke that. I love Franklin Roosevelt and a lot of other things. But let's stop kidding ourselves. This state needs to get up to date on many levels. And we are, we should be ashamed of the fact we haven't raised the age already. We should be ashamed of how long it took to fix the Rockefeller drug laws and how deeply this state went into mass incarceration. We should be ashamed of the fact that we have absolutely backwards electoral laws, which are not disconnected to the fact that all these other things took so long to fix. So it has to happen now. I do think, because that whole mass incarceration movement I talked about, I do think the pressure is really mounting, and the Assembly in particular has been fighting very hard for this. Let's go back to front. I see a hand over there. Yep.
So you have expressed openness to expanding the set of crimes that the city cooperates with ICE on, but Speaker Mark has said that she's against doing that. Would you say that that's not going to happen given her opposition?
I have not heard her say she is against doing that. I'm just going to tell you exactly what I understand from both the public domain and my own conversations with her. We're going to put forward a proposal that we think properly updates the law. We think the law can be improved. I'm very proud of that law because 170 offenses really does get to the heart of the matter. And unlike the extreme of having no offenses for which we would participate with ICE, which I think would be madness, or any and all things that anyone does wrong, including littering, we're going to hand them over to ICE, which I also think would be madness. We have a very clear set of rules, and the 170 offenses is the core of those rules. But I think we can improve the law. I believe the Speaker will give our proposal a fair hearing. I believe the members of the Council will, too. And the Speaker plays a very important role, but we also have a dialogue with all 51 members. So we're not there yet. We have not put the proposal forward, but I believe it will ultimately be something the Council takes very seriously. Way back. Bobby?
Back to the legal defense fund real quick. Assuming that you cannot foot your own legal bills, you've said yourself you're not a billionaire, would you leave open the possibility of using city taxpayer funds for legal defense?
I don't see that scenario. I believe since legal defense funds are such a well-known tool, and I've been at this a long time, I've never heard a critique of the concept of legal defense funds until now. But if we have to figure out the right ground rules, that's perfectly fair, and I believe we'll eventually find a way to do that. Yeah.
Mayor, regarding the court's ruling yesterday, maintaining the injunction against the opening of the homeless shelter in Crown Heights, what is your reaction to that, and how does this impede your plan to get the shelter restocked?
I respect the judge, but I think we have handled the process properly. We're not going to wait long. I think the judge said that she's going to come back in 2 weeks, which is obviously not a long time in the scheme of things. We believe we'll prevail. We think we're on very firm legal grounds. And then we're going to continue. I don't see anything about this that will ultimately stop us from moving forward our plan.
Decides, no, you can't have the shelter there, you just move on to another location?
I'm going to be, first of all, I honestly believe we're going to prevail. We think the law is squarely on our side, and if we have to appeal, we'll appeal, et cetera, et cetera. But it parallels other situations. I want to be very clear about this. Before, and I think we didn't do a good job of communicating in many ways around Maspeth originally. But the reason we didn't follow through on Maspeth is the owner of the facility pulled out. We're going to have another facility there. There's no question about that, and there's 250 people from that community board who should be in shelter as locally as possible. We're going to have a facility there. We're going to have a facility in the community board that includes Crown Heights because there's more need for people who come from that community. We'll find the right place. I believe this is it. I also think considering it's a facility for people 62 years and older, I'm a little surprised at some of the folks who are opposing it. But this plan will be implemented, period. Sometimes there'll be delays. Sometimes we may have to find a different location for a very specific reason, but we are adamant it will be implemented. It will be implemented on time. Henry?
4 years ago, you ran for mayor. You won quite convincingly. Talking about income.
We're having a very good day, Henry. Yeah.
This year, your focus is much more on affordability. It's much more on talking about the city as one city. And I'm thinking, I'm wondering what your thinking was in changing the emphasis of your message.
I appreciate the question. I would argue affordability is in a direct extension of the discussion of the Tale of Two Cities. I know I've seen different analyses. We've changed our message. I've seen analyses saying we're sticking to our message. I would like to clarify for everyone, we are sticking to our original message. But you got to update some elements of it when you're in government because we're responsible for what we've done. So I would argue, one, the affordability crisis is part and parcel of the income inequality crisis because the cost of living has made it impossible for people to make ends meet, so we have to go at that. And as we've introduced this year more and more of a focus on the jobs piece, that is about raising incomes, which gets right back to income inequality and affronting the Tale of Two Cities. Because I think what happened before was, one side of the equation got all the advantages and the other side didn't. Well, what's happened since? Pre-K for all, after school for all, rent freeze, vast affordable housing plan, legal counsel, for folks who make up to $50,000, which is a supreme act of addressing income inequality. I could go on with many other examples. So we believe we're fundamentally addressing income inequality. On the one city point, I think it's a really normal construct to say it's a tale of two cities. We don't want to remain that way. Now, everyone asked me the very fair question, does that mean we're going to get the wealthy to give up all their money till we can get to a single equal income for all? No. Tempting. But no, it's not going to happen. Don't have that legal authority. The idea was never, could we make the super rich not super rich? It was absolutely, could we make the super rich pay their fair share in taxes? We tried that originally with pre-K. We're doing it again with mansion tax. It's absolutely pushing the private sector to do more. But really, it was about raising the floor, first and foremost. Higher wages, better benefits, like paid sick leave, $15 minimum wage, taking financial burdens off people. That's pre-K, that's after school. Obviously, big, first and foremost, affordable housing. But it's also raising wages beyond the minimum wage with a bigger vision of more jobs and higher paying jobs and getting more New Yorkers. I love a new high paying job in New York City. I love it generically. But if it goes to someone who comes in from California, that's not the same thing as if it goes to someone who grew up in the Bronx and went to our public schools or came out of CUNY. So I'm trying to change the equation. More jobs, more high-paying jobs, more jobs that go to people who are actually from here. So long answer to your short question, I think the affordability crisis and the way we're trying to address affordability is directly related to the original concept of addressing the Tale of Two Cities. I think when we talk about one city, it is the aspirational goal of reducing inequality incessantly, which will not only be my mission, but I hope many of my successors. David?
Going back to the conflict of interest board opinion, the advisory opinion didn't say that you couldn't set up a legal defense fund. It just said that you'd be limited in almost every case to accepting only donations under $50 for that. Now, you suggested that you'd go back to them and try and get them to change that ruling. Is that what you're saying? That you'd sort of, or would you work on the assumption that that ruling doesn't have any legal holding? And then
no, I have a lot of respect for the conflict of interest board. So, first of all, this now initiates a dialogue. I mean, they're a government body like everyone else. You can go back and say, well, what about this example, or what about this history? And again, this is not just applying to me, it applies to other people who may need to use this approach. Second, as they've indicated, a potential solution is through legislation. That's a perfectly fair possibility. I'm not committing to anything yet because they literally just put it out. We have to think about it, we have to talk to them, but that's another avenue. So I haven't drawn any conclusions.
Solution is if you had a close friend who could give you unlimited donations. Do you have any close friend that would
I'd like to meet that close friend. I don't know of that person, but again, I don't want to speak in terms of theoreticals. This is a conversation that now we will initiate with the Conflict of Interest Board, which I've been very focused throughout my public career and adhering to their decisions. Go ahead, Juliet.
How long would a change in legislation take in order to...
Who knows?
Ceiling.
No, it's a perfectly fair question, but I'm jumping in to say, so the ruling came out an hour ago. Well, we have to look at, we have to talk to them, we have to think about what it means. And again, I don't know, just absolute respect for them. I, again, have long positive working relationship with them and have followed their specific guidance throughout my career. I've gone to them many times long before I had this office. But I don't know if they looked at the different models that have been used around the country. I just don't know. We want to have that conversation first, and others who are interested should have the conversation as well, and then we'll see what it means. I can't surmise what legislation would take. Sometimes legislation moves fast, sometimes it doesn't, but we're not even close to that yet.
Is that the only way to change?
I just said it may not be because we have to have a conversation with them to see if they have looked at all the possibilities. Go ahead, Rich.
So, Mr. Mayor, so maybe I missed it, and I apologize if I did, but you stoutly defended the rights of other city employees to be defended by city money.
Sure.
Why is it that you don't feel like you should be defended by city money?
It's not a feeling question, Rich. It is that I think, look, I maybe could give a parallel to when the pay raise issue came up. I thought it was important because I was a part of that process not to take a pay raise for this term. I think, because I'm the leader of the whole operation, it is better not to ask the taxpayers to cover expenses, even if they're valid expenses, right? I mean, this was an investigation involved to some extent things I was doing as part of my official work. Obviously, we were exonerated, but I just don't feel comfortable asking the taxpayers to pay for that piece of the equation.
Mother, as you know, was furious that Richard Hayes was allowed to quit. Your office explained that these are union rules.
Yeah.
Would you like to see those rules change if something like this happens, where an officer is convicted by an NYPD?
Look, that's obviously a subject of negotiation. I would say it a little, I mean, I'd respond to it differently. A mother's grief, there's nothing, sadly, tragically, that could compare to how much pain she's in. And mothers who have lost other children. And the first thing I want to say is my mission is that no other mother in New York City goes through that. And I think it's hard for us to think beyond tragedy, and I understand that we're human beings. But meanwhile, what we've been doing consistently, having learned such painful lessons from these tragedies, is changing the nature of policing. You know, I don't think anyone sort of fully took in what a radical thing it was the day that Bill Bratton said he was going to retrain the entire police force and then keep retraining the entire police force. That's changed everything in terms of how officers approach these situations. Neighborhood policing is changing everything. implicit bias training, which is happening this year, which is an extraordinary development for the NYPD, is going to change things. So job one is don't have another tragedy. In terms of this situation, the process, unlike, we had a DA process that ended up in an unclear outcome, a DOJ process ended up with an unclear outcome. The one process that actually followed through was the NYPD's disciplinary process, and it resulted in a decision of termination. I think that was a functioning process. I think it got to a clear outcome. And the fact that he resigned first, I understand why that's painful to some, but I don't find it to be the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is there was a disciplinary process. It came to a clear verdict. That verdict has been effectively achieved. He's off the force. He lost his pension. I think there's clearly been consequences here, and that's what a process is supposed to engender. I'm going to keep going a little bit more. Go ahead.
Will you meet with Ms. Malcolm now?
I just want to say Eric Phillips has been standing a long time. I think you're all very insensitive. Go ahead.
Will you meet with Ms. Malcolm?
I would say this. There are two upfront, honest conditions I would put on any potential meeting. I cannot talk about ongoing cases. Everyone knows there are 2 more officers that will be going through a disciplinary process. The ultimate adjudicator in that process is Commissioner O'Neill, who directly reports to me. So I would not be comfortable being in a room where anyone attempted to sway my view from either side about specific disciplinary actions on specific officers, and there are 2 more coming up. If she said, I want to talk to you about what happened in the previous case, to understand it better or to critique it any way like that, that is acceptable. If she wants to talk about our efforts to change the police force and protect against this kind of incident in the future, I would do that. But I'm going to be very straightforward. I'm saying it publicly, but we'll also communicate directly to her lawyers. I'm very clear that those would be the ground rules. I feel morally those have to be the ground rules because there has to be a guarantee of equal justice to everyone in the equation, whether they're a community resident or a police officer. If she truly can accept those ground rules, I would meet with her. If she cannot, I do not think it would be appropriate.
Just one quick follow-up. You said you would talk to Commissioner O'Neill about the Blasio leak and think progress. Have you done that, and how did that discussion go, and how did you feel when you read about Officer Panileo's history?
Look, the history causes concerns. There's no 2 ways about it. That's my point, that he was trained in a different world. And I want to be fair. I don't know the details of each case, and we should not rush to conclusions. But, of course, it raises questions. But I also want to say this is an individual who was trained under an entirely different leadership of the police force with an entirely different approach. Today's officers are being trained and supervised with a very different philosophy.
Back to the homelessness shelter issue. We did a story last week on sort of 1 year since the East New York rezoning deal, and part of that deal was closing down 2 shelters. Councilmember Espinal said everything's great, but that, the city's following through, but that's one area of concern. He said we got 2 shelters closed in this deal, and now the city's talking about opening more. So what do you say to residents of East New York who, sort of supported that deal based on reducing the number of shelters?
I don't have all the chapter and verse in front of me, but whatever specific commitments we made, we're absolutely going to keep. That being said, I don't think there's any unfairness in saying we came up with a brand new policy and we have to apply that policy fairly. I think typically when there's a complaint about shelters, it is specific to the shelter. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't overall concern. I'm saying when council members have come to us, and a lot of council members have multiple shelters in their district. I have, when I was council member for District 39, I had a shelter 3 blocks from my home. But I was at peace with how it was connected to the community. I had a marine transfer station I could walk to, but I was at peace that it was not having a negative impact on my community. I think there are plenty of shelters where we don't hear complaints from council members. My understanding was that Councilman Espinal had complaints about and concerns about these specific shelters and specific things about them, and we will fulfill our commitments. But we also have to move to a model that is borough-based and community-based, and we'll continue to do that. I think we can do that with him. I don't know the numbers. I don't know what the numbers in his district say. Again, in my community board 6 Brooklyn, there's about 100 more beds that will have to be put in as part of our homeless plan. In others, there's actually reductions that will be anticipated eventually. I'd have to look at his to know for sure. But either way you slice it, we'll keep the original commitment.
In terms of ICE staking out the courthouses, NYPD is going to come up with by June guidance for when to use the civil versus the criminal summonses for small quality of life offenses, and obviously immigrants would be safe going to oath on city property, not necessarily to the courts as they're being staked out by ICE. Is that something that's going to play into the decision making in terms of civil versus criminal summonses?
Liz may jump in if she wants to add. I want to go back to first principles. Job one on anything about criminal justice is keeping the city safe. And, you know, again, I understand some who have critiqued quality of life policing and then connected that critique to the Trump administration reality and the new immigration policies. I keep coming back to, and it's just what I believe. People can ask it 100 times. I'll keep giving you the same answer. I believe our job is to keep people safe, and we think quality of life policing is a part of that. And it's being applied in a more and more fair manner. More warnings and summonses, fewer arrests, obviously fewer. We changed the whole policy on arrests for low-level marijuana possession. I think that's the right way to go for the safety of New York City. I'm not going to make a decision first and foremost because it may have a ramification at some point for some individual who is undocumented. I'm going to make it based on what's in the interest of the safety of New York City. But I believe our overall approach actually does satisfy that second concern about our undocumented residents, that quality of life policing, and Liz can correct the record if there's any qualifier here, but quality of life policing overwhelmingly does not put undocumented folks into contact with ICE because it rarely results in an arrest unless there are other outstanding warrants or, again, intensive repeat behavior. Let's let Liz just speak to it, and then you can follow.
No, that's exactly right. And as far as the summonses moving from criminal to civil, that's in statute. So that's going to move forward no matter what. That's going to start in July 1. And there's a specified list of summonses that will be enforceable as civil offenses.
Right, they will be enforceable, but the NYPD is going to make a decision about when the officers are instructed to give out civil summonses as opposed to criminal.
Correct. I think that there's a broad acceptance that in the default will be civil offenses, and that NYPD will reserve the right to use the criminal option when appropriate.
Right. Commissioner Bratton very powerfully, when he was in office, talked about the peace dividend. And I think the question is very, very pertinent given the environment we're in. But just let me finish. But I think also I'm asking for a little bit of perspective here. This NYPD has steadily decreased its contact with everyday New Yorkers and looked for the least invasive, if you will, way of addressing a problem. That has been the training, that officer discretion gets to that. So I think it's clear there's been a steady downward movement in terms of arrest in particular. And the things that now are more favored whenever possible, summons and warning, et cetera, do not put anyone in harm's way who's undocumented.
But a criminal summons will send you to court, correct? And you can be issued a bench warrant if you don't show up and then be arrested. But even before that...
Yeah, but wait. But Liz, you can speak to the process. If someone has done a quality of life offense, so we're not talking about they did other much worse things in the past, and we're not talking about like someone who jumps a turnstile 10 times. Just let's do a first-time offender, litterer, open container, you name it. Liz, what happens after, if they're even given a summons, what happens?
So the most important thing is that they're not fingerprinted. So it is an invisible offense with respect to ICE. So it's like a ticket. You have your ticket and you show up in summons court, and then it's determined whether the summons will be dismissed or you pay a fine.
You pay your summons, right. So you have those are the two outcomes. So let me see if there's anything else. Henry?
Just torture this audience here. Follow that question. I'm trying to figure out
Aren't you up for election as the...
No.
No, okay.
why you're using different words this year.
What words?
Affordability versus income inequality.
Okay,
Why did you choose to use
I really think I spoke to it, but I'll just say it this way. Because we believe that the central problem, and I have experienced this more and more in office, the central problem facing the city is affordability. And that also allows us to encompass the solutions that are about reducing the cost of housing and improving incomes through better jobs, higher paying jobs. So I don't think it's a major evolution. I also think when you're in office, you have to own the overall picture, which is different from when you're outside trying to critique a reality. And we believe we're addressing income inequality, we are addressing the Tale of Two Cities, we're addressing the affordable housing crisis and the affordability crisis in general. Again, I don't think it's a big difference. I'm going to see if there's anything else before we go. Going once, twice, thank you.